Alright, so in this tutorial we're going to talk about placing guides and marking off the bleeds in your document. And I'll start just by going into Scribus and opening up the document that we had created last time. So this is the, I believe, 102 by 78 document that we had open last time. So a guide is essentially just an invisible line that you see when you're laying things out on the page, and it helps you put some perspective into where different parts of your document start and end. But when you actually go to create the PDF and print the document, you won't see the guides unless you specifically change a setting to show guides. You're not going to see them. So I'll show you the one way to make a guide is just to put your pointer in the ruler and then click and drag down. And as you're dragging down, you'll see there's a little tooltip that pops up that shows you where you are on the page. It gives you the X or the Y coordinate. You can certainly make guides this way, but trying to get the guide, like let's say I wanted one right at 12p6, it's really hard to use your mouse to actually get it into position correctly. So I'm going to show you how to add guides using the guide manager as well, where you actually type in the position that you want the guides to be at. Down here in the bottom there's a little icon of a human eye. That'll enable the preview mode, so if you're ever working and you want to see what this document looks like without the guides in it, because sometimes if you have a ton of guides they can get in the way, you can click on that, and then you can also check for color blindness as well using this drop-down menu when you're in the preview mode to see whether or not your document's going to look okay for people who have color blindness. Let's talk about using the guide manager. So I'm going to go ahead and go to page, and then I'm going to click on manage guide, and this will pull up this window. Now these are the guides that I just dragged from the ruler down and created, so I'm going to delete those. Click on them and hit delete. There we go. Okay, so now we're ready to start inputting guides. So remember, we're working off of this sample box that I've already measured, and we don't really need to worry too much about the width of the flaps. If this were commercial production, the printer would use essentially a die to cut large stacks of these boxes after they had been printed, and then they'd remove the excess material, and that's how you end up with those flaps. But we do need to know about how tall each flap is, because we want to calculate our bleeds as well. Now, I don't know if you're going to be watching this at a time when we've already discussed bleeds in class, but I'll just give you a quick overview. Those are the parts of your document that run over the edge that's going to be cut, so that the color or image that you're putting on the edge of the text runs right to the edge of the document. No printer actually prints all the way to the edge of the document, whether it's commercial or just the printer you've got sitting around in your house. You get close to the edge of the document, but printers won't print over the edge of a document. If you want the color or image or text of your document to run to the edge or over the edge of your finished product, then you have to use bleeds, which is where you run that background color or image right up to the edge, and then you actually cut the physical product down so that you can see color running right up to the edge of the finished document. Let's zoom in here on this sketch. So we've got a few different parts. We've got the little glue strip area that's only 3 picas wide. You've got the main flap, which is 30 wide, side flap 16, back 30, other side 16. Oops, I lost my document. Pull it back up there. So those are your width dimensions. So we can use that to calculate all of the vertical guides, because when you're marking off these sections, you're going to want guides that run from top to bottom vertical. And then for horizontal guides, we need to know how tall these flaps are. So I believe on the bottom I measured the height. Yeah, so we've got 11 picas for the big flap, and then the flap that comes off the side panels is 7 picas high. So we're going to want guides at the top and the bottom for that. And then I think we'll also want guides for the top and bottom of the flap areas, so or the panel areas. So we know that the panels are 47.5 picas tall, so that's 47p6 using the notation that document design programs use. So 47.5 plus 11, so 47.5 plus 22. And I should actually have the calculator open while I'm doing this. Plus 22. So from the top of this flap all the way down, all the way down to the bottom of this flap, that's going to be 69.5 picas, or 69p6. Okay, so we know about how tall our design is going to be. For the width, we want to just add up all the width measurements. I should say the height is going to be a little smaller here because it's only 7 picas tall, but we can put guides in for that as well. For the width, it's going to be 3, the glue strip, plus the front, 30, plus one side, 16, plus the back, 30, plus another side, 16. 95 picas is the width for the design. And then we're actually going to add 3 to each of these dimensions. So we'll have 98, and then we'll put, if we need, we can put another guide over here. You can decide on your margins at the very beginning of the project. Here I'm going to use 3 pica margins, which is half an inch. You could also go with a 1/4 inch, which would be 1p6, 1 pica 6 point. Either one is fine, typically for most applications. If you're being generous with the bleed area, you can go with half an inch. And I think we have enough room in this design because, what did we say, 102 for the width, 98 minus 102. 102 is 4. So we'll have 3 left over. So we've got plenty of room left in the design to fit it width-wise. And then height-wise, I think I calculated enough room as well. So let's go ahead and start putting in guides. So the first guide we want, and I think what I'll do is I'll make this a little smaller so that we can keep it down here as a point of reference while I'm adding the guides. Oh, but I also want, I don't necessarily want to lose all our other stuff too. So let me just rearrange the screens here. Okay, and let's get our calculator down here. Let's start with the vertical guides. So the vertical guides are going to run top to bottom in the document. We're going to add the first one, which is going to be 3 picas, and you can just put 3 in and hit enter. It'll change it to points. That's kind of an unfortunate quirk of Scribus, is that it doesn't keep the same increments that you use. Okay, 3 picas for the first guide. That'll just be our margin. Then we're going to want another guide for 3 picas for this glue flap. So we're going to add another one at 6. Okay, and then we're going to want another one after that. So we're going to need one for this first front panel. So we're going to add 30 to that. So we're going to have 36. Okay, so here's our margin area for bleeds. Here's the glue flap, and here's the front panel of the box. Okay, then we want to add 16 to that. So 36 plus 16 is 52. Yep. So we're going to put one in at 52. Oops, let me try that again. 52. Okay. So this is our right side panel. We're going to want the back now, so we're going to add 30 picas to 52. So I'm going to have one at 82. So this is our back panel, and then let's scroll this drawing over a little bit. And then we want the final side panel, which is 16. So that's going to be 82 plus 16, 98. So I'll go ahead and put that one in. Okay, and then we don't probably need another guide. We have 4 picas left over, just like the calculation that I did at the beginning predicted. So 4 is going to be fine. We'll just know that this is the bleed area for our right side panel. And I think that's it for vertical guides. Let's put in the horizontal guides. So the vertical ones are pretty straightforward, right? Bleed area, glue flap, front panel, right side panel, back panel, left side panel, when you're looking at the box straight on. Let's put in the horizontals. So I guess what I'll do is I'll reconfigure these windows again. Let me change it so that we can see more of the page horizontally. And I'll get the guide manager over here. Okay, that should work. Okay, so we know that the first thing we want to do is add 3 pica guide, and again, that's arbitrary. You know, it can go all the way down to 1p6 for most printing applications, but we're gonna do 3 and have some generous space here. 36 point is 3 pica, so that's our first guide. We then want to get one for the start of the box face, right? So we want to come down 11. Oops, let me scroll to the bottom where I have the vertical measurements for the flaps. We want to come down 11 from the top margin, which we have up here. So we're going to calculate that 11 pica addition, and that's going to be 11 plus 3, since our bleed area is 3 picas tall, so that's going to be 14. Okay, the next one we want is the smaller folding flap, probably, right? We've got so this marks where the bleed area ends, so this is where the end of where the bleed area begins, so this is where the top of the large flap is going to end. So that's the box panel to the top of the flap. Now we want to put a guide in for the side panel to the top of the smaller flaps that go on the side. So in order to get that, we are going to take 3 plus, go down here, 7, right? So we have an area here of 11 from box top to top of flap, and we need to calculate from box top to top of small flap, which is going to be our horizontal value, 14 minus 7. And hopefully that makes sense. So 14 minus 7 is 7. So that means the tall flap is going to go from the top of the box here up 11 picas to the bleed area. The small flap is only 7, so it's going to come from the top of the box area here up 7 to where the small flap area is going to end. And this is going to be the bleed area, these 2 boxes the guides are making. That's going to be the bleed area for the small flap. Now we need to calculate the dimensions for the box face, and I already measured that at 47.5 picas. So we're going to come from the top here down 47.5 to get to the bottom of the box. So I'm going to scroll down so that we can see. Let's see. So 47.5 plus 15 is 61.5. So we're going to add that in, 61, and then can you do 0.5? No, it doesn't like when you put a decimal there. You have to use the pica point notation. So you got to go 61p6. So 12 point in 1 pica, 61.5 picas is going to be 61 pica 6 points, so 61p6. Okay, so that area is the face of our box and the side panels as well. Then we want to come down and make those extra guides for the flaps again. So right here we're at 61 P6. We want to come down 11 for the large flap and 7 for the small flap. So 61.5 plus 11 is 72.5, so 72 P6. And then we need, once again, guide for the small flap, so it's going to be 61.5 plus 7 is 68.5, so 68 P6. Okay, so there's where our large flap is going to go, and that's where the small flap is going to go at the bottom. And again, we know now where the bleeds are going to be. But since sometimes it can get confusing, when you're looking at a sketch like this, it's pretty obvious what each part of the box is. Even though I have not drawn it to scale, you can sort of tell what parts are being used because I shaded everything in. We don't have that, though, in Scribus. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to pull this up, and let's zoom out a little bit. You can kind of see the outline taking place, even when you don't have anything in here marking where the bleed area is. Here's our glue flap down here, box faces, the panels, and here's the flap area, large flap, small, large, small. But since we don't want to get confused when we're laying things out and accidentally lay something out in the bleed area and then realize we have less space to work with than we need, and we have to completely start over, let's just put some text boxes with X's in the areas that are going to be cut away. So why don't we can start up top here. So in our tall flap area, right here, let's put the caps lock on, and here, let me zoom in a little bit. I'll just put a string of X's. So this isn't anything fancy, but it will remind us that this area is going to be cut away when we do the final design. So we will know not to lay anything out in this area because that's only for bleeds. Let's make a copy of this, and I'm just going to copy and paste it. Oh, that's a little too long to fit in there. I'll copy and paste it into this area, and then I will reduce the size of the text box. Because we've got our large flap going up here, and then our small flap is only going to come up to this guide. So we know anything beyond these X's is just for bleeds only. You could do this, since we're doing it, you can do it for all of the areas that are going to be cut away. That way there's no confusion. So copy and paste, and I'm just going to drag that over here. And let's see, if we do this right, maybe we can just reuse all of these. I'm holding Shift down and clicking on these things to select multiples. Yeah, that's not actually going to be in the right configuration because it's the opposite on the bottom, but we can just move what we need to. Alright, that'll go there. That'll go there. Move this down to here, and this down to here. You don't have to do it exactly this way. This is just one method for remembering where your bleed area is. If you have something else that's easier or that works better for you, do it. Let's see. Let's get the vertical areas. Let me get the properties window over here. Oops. All right, I'm going to change the rotation on this text box to 90 degrees. That'll make that vertical. Okay, so we know that that's the glue flap. So everything over here is going to get cut away. And I mean, if you wanted to, you could, I guess, run it across the entire bleed area just so there's no confusion. So this is our bleed area, and let's see, that's actually going to be too big. Let me get this small one and make a copy. Change the rotation. So this is all going to be bleeds as well, because if we look again at the sketch, we've got our glue pad, or our glue flap right here. So that's going to be this area here. So everything above that is going to get cut away in the final design. And then this is where our top flap from the front panel is going to live. So we're going to keep that as is. Let's see, any other bleeds we need to mark off here? I guess we can mark the one over on the right-hand side too. I'll just copy these and move those over to the right-hand side. Okay, very good. Oh, let me move that down. You can run stuff over into the scratch area, this gray area off the page. It won't print, but we're not going to keep these X's anyway. We wouldn't want to print the design because like this, because essentially what you're doing is just wasting ink. Once you have the final design figured out and you have all the bleeds laid out, you don't have to worry about accidentally typesetting something in the bleed area. Then it's no problem. You can just get rid of all of these marks because, well, if this was going to be commercially produced, it would be cut by a machine. So you wouldn't have to think about actually needing to make the cuts yourself. It would be a die that would cut the boxes. If you were cutting this by hand, though, it might be useful to put some crop marks in so you know exactly what parts you're retaining. But this would actually be very difficult to cut by hand because you have triangles that you would have to calculate the geometry on, and so you need a lot of different crop marks in this document to make sure you cut it by hand. Not impossible, but just a little bit more difficult than having a machine cut it. And you cannot, commercial printers will not typically make these angled cuts for you just because their cutting machines only make vertical and horizontal cuts. If you want something like this, you need a punch die that'll cut through either one, or probably more likely if you were doing this commercially, a whole stack of paperboard boxes. Okay, so in this tutorial, we calculated all of the guides based on the sketch of the original box, and then we marked out our bleed areas so we know that we're not going to accidentally, I just noticed we can get one more in here if we're marking all the bleed areas, so that we're not accidentally going to lay something out in the bleed area and then have to later on refine our design. So you can see it's starting to take shape here. Here's the top flaps, here's the bottom flaps, here's the 4 panels of the box, and the glue flap that you would glue the whole assembly together with. So we're getting much more towards laying out all of the different elements that we want onto the page. So that's the end of this tutorial.